The topics and opinions expressed on the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4WN Radio, its employees, or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4WN Radio.
This is Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. Do you want to live a more fulfilling life? Do you want to live your legacy and achieve your personal, professional, and financial goals? Well, coming up on Divya Parekh's Beyond Confidence, you will hear real stories of leaders, entrepreneurs, and achievers who have stepped into discomfort, shattered their status quo, and are living the life they want. You will learn how relationships are the key to achieving your aspirations and financial goals. Moving your career or business forward does not have to happen at the expense of your personal or family life, or vice versa. Learn more at www.divyaparekh.com, and you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. This is Beyond Confidence, and now here's your host, Divya Parekh.
Good morning, listeners. I cannot share with you, so thrilled to be here with y'all. And not going to read it out, but one of my clients sent me a handwritten note. And yesterday I was having a little difficult day, so just, a few things happening. And then I opened up my mail. So I want to give a shout out to Sharon. And when I read her note, it reminded me of my why I do what I do. It's to make a difference and make an impact in other people's lives. So never underestimate your presence and who you can influence. So be sure to do that kind act whenever you get a chance, because you never know who might be needing that. Also, thank you for those who have purchased our books. And if you have not, we invite you to purchase our books. It helps us in 3 ways. It helps you. It helps to get the message out. And thirdly, it also helps us to share part of the profits with kiva.org. So let's bring in our guest. Welcome,
Good morning. Yes, good morning.
So we start out with a moment in your childhood or youth where it was an event, a person, or something that left a positive mark on you. Do you recall a moment or a person like that?
Absolutely. I would have to say my father. And in the moment, I didn't realize what a positive effect he had on me. He was a very strong man. He lectured us a lot. And it wasn't until later in my life that I realized that was his way of showing us that he loved us. He was always telling us what to do and sitting us down and lecturing for hours about everything, of how to change the oil in your car, to how to cut the grass, you name it. But he was imparting his wisdom, showing us he loved us the only way he knew how. So it wasn't until I got to be quite a bit older that I had that kind of epiphany.
And here's the thing, a lot of people think that their parents didn't do good by them. And I'm not saying they don't, but it's also to kind of keep in mind that sometimes their generation, they don't even know that. Okay, we got to tell our kids, express our love for them, appreciate them. So when you kind of when you're talking about that, then you know that it was his way of supporting you, making sure that, y'all would be successful in your life. And it sounds like you learned a lot of things from him.
Oh boy, did we. And I realized after he passed away that all the things he taught us, he was doing that so when he was gone, we would know how to, get a bat out of a house, change your oil, fix a leaky faucet, all those practical things, so we could be more self-sufficient.
And those are such important skills to have. And
especially the bat.
Yeah, it is. And one thing I'll share with you, there are some things my parents have passed away, and I'll miss them and I'll remember them quite often. Like, you know what? My dad would say something like that. My mom would say something like that. I wish I had taken advantage of that opportunity. And
Mhm.
that kind of brings us is it's time is of essence. Time is so important. Like it's so important to respect time. And most of us don't do that. So I'm glad that, you walked away with a lot of practical approaches. So as you grew up, tell me, what were your interests? Where did you want your life to go?
I didn't have much of our family was a family that never went to college. You went to school and then you started working right away, and there was no grandmaster plan. So I just gravitated towards things that were put in front of me that I could turn into something. So I graduated high school and went to work the very next day and never stopped working until I was let go from my job in 23. But I think while it wasn't an intentional path, what I
Mm.
learned was to be open to and picking up on things that started to come easy to me. And that it kind of my life and my direction just kind of evolved. So it wasn't set, it kind of had this evolution.
And that has its own power because so many people have this set path, but there is no one size that fits all. And then there is
Mhm.
no right path or wrong path. It is whatever works for you. So it's very powerful. You said that I graduated and from very next day I went to work. And a lot of younger generation would be, there was no gap time in between there. So tell us a little bit more about that. And it's important to have time for yourself as well. So what was it that made you transition that quickly and you didn't even think about taking any time off in between?
I think it was from as we grew up in I was born in the 60s, and my formative years were in the 70s, and our family that we were just blue collar workers, and so you just worked hard every day, and there was no thought of taking care of yourself. It really didn't come into play. Your work was your life. So the part-time job I had all through high school, as soon as I graduated high school, it was a natural progression, just walking right into that. And it was never a thought in my mind that there was something other out there for me, whether it was rest or whether it was the opportunity to go to college. It just wasn't even a thought.
Mm. So given now you have had formation in the last century and this century, for people like you and I, what would you say? How could people bring that balance? Like having that mindset for work, along with creating that balance between work and life.
There's so many people that say you have to have the work-life balance. You have to have, the way I view it as you just have to have a life balance, and it's never going to
Mhm.
be 50-50. It's never going to be 80-20. It's one, getting clear on your boundaries of what you can and cannot accept in your life, and taking time and knowing that when you do need to break away and get quiet and kind of tune out what's going on, that's when the magic happens. Honestly, I've gone through some kind of very stressful times in my life where I didn't give myself that time and space, and it looks different for everybody, and at different phases in your life it may look different. It may be getting away from the little kids when you're a young parent, but it may be personal connections with your girlfriends a little bit later in life. So that connection and that re-energizing looks different based on where you are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's very powerful. What I like is when you mentioned about life balance, and it's very much along the lines that I think, there is work-life harmony because there may be a
Mhm.
time. So, for example, if you're an accountant, and these 3 months, like when you're talking about
Yeah.
January, February, March, and April, you gotta work it off because these are the high seasons. And as
Hmm.
you mentioned that it's just kind of finding that time, what you can, what you cannot do. So actually one of my clients is accountant, and he decided to be in corporate, and not have his own private practice and not go through that seasonal cycle. So that is really, really critical, like knowing where are your boundaries, what are your priorities, and that really helps. So coming back to your journey, you mentioned that, you stepped into that role. So tell us a little bit about your career journey till you were laid off.
Right. So, I coming out of taking that first job and growing, and the first couple jobs in my life weren't super stressful. It was just learning who I was, what I was good at. I always had to have some kind of a purpose. The companies I had to work for, I knew they had to do good. And that kind of gave me this good sense of I was giving back, or, I was doing something that honored other people. But then as I got to a certain level, and at that point, I was going through a divorce. I had a 6-month-old and a 2-year-old. And then it kind of morphed into, okay, this isn't just a job. This is, I have to support my family as a single parent. And that was a switch to say, okay, I need to get more serious about dedicating myself to work so I can climb that ladder, so I can make more money. And again, at the time, didn't realize it, but there was this, since I was the one who initiated the separation, I kind of felt this guilt on myself that I didn't want my kids to want for anything because of my decision. So that's where I just started working more hours, climbing the ladder, and just putting more and more pressure on myself. And at the time, didn't realize it because I was so focused on earn, climb, and support the family. So that's kind of where the switch happened. And then I found myself in a company that was having some legal challenges that I needed to separate myself from, because again, I needed to be in a good environment during the day.
Right.
And I took a job with a security company, and I absolutely loved it because the purpose was there. And that's the job I was at for 20 years.
That's amazing. So you mentioned about, and there are a lot of parents who are single parents, whether they're men or women, and single parenting is not that easy. So what were some of the lessons you learned from that time that you might tell some of our listeners who may be single parents right now and raising young babies?
You don't have to do it all yourself. Set the bar a little bit lower. I got super creative. That was a time in my life where I had to be super resourceful. I would go grocery shopping at lunchtime. Nowadays, you can just order online and it's delivered, but you had to get really resourceful and know that you didn't have to do it all. And at the time, I think one of the lessons in hindsight is I thought I was always kind of shortchanging my kids, just keeping my head above water. But I focused on things that made me more resilient, and it actually taught my kids how to be more resilient themselves. I didn't even realize it. I wasn't trying to do that. But later in life, my kids have both said, we could just kind of followed your lead, and we knew how to get ourselves up. We knew how to get ourselves breakfast, get ourselves off to school. I never had any of those issues because it was just the way of our family. And to not beat yourself up and you can't compare yourself to the person next door because they have different resources and different priorities. So you just have to focus on, all right, what's right in front of me that I need to get done? And it doesn't have to be perfect. Never has to be perfect.
I really like a couple of things that you pointed out. One was not to compare yourself with others because you're not walking in anybody else's shoes. You're not there. You don't know. Right. So now, can you compare yourself with yourself? Sure. Like you mentioned about being resourceful and not being perfect. And also understanding that kids are resilient. And sounds like you gave them love. You were there for them and they grew up really well.
And what's funny is when I grew up, my dad would lecture us and tell us, and we became resourceful because he told us and taught us. But I look back and I look at my kids, and while I didn't sit and lecture them, they learn based off example. So I kind of started thinking, oh my gosh, is it's kind of history repeating itself, but in a different way.
Definitely. You mentioned that, you enjoyed working with the security company. So tell us about your career over there and what was it that you
Yeah.
liked about it?
So what I loved about that was, and I started out kind of in a marketing creative realm, and it blossomed into the company that I worked for. And I'll be a little careful here because I don't want to divulge too much about the company because there are things that they do that
Sure.
need to be kept under wraps. But we basically worked with law enforcement in high pressure situations. And I came in on the front end of that chapter in the company and I grew with it. So it went from
Mm,
this very narrow focus over the years, it took on more and more and more and more. So you kind of grew up with this product, with this service, and you got fully ingrained in it and you had a stake in what was happening and it was exciting. You were doing good. It was like you could go home and know that I had this impact. And it felt great. And the bigger that got, the more you took on, the better you felt. Now, in hindsight, I realized I was starting to identify myself as the job, and I kind of lost sense of me as a person, but it felt good.
mm, because you were making an impact.
Exactly.
And yeah, so you were working in a very high pressure jobs, and you have shared that
Mhm.
there was something like a couple of your colleagues died within 3 weeks of each other. Tell us about that time.
Right. Yeah, so my job was I oversaw a 24/7 department. So you
Mm,
could never really shut off. You woke in the morning and it was stressful. You came in on a Monday and it was like you'd been on vacation every single week. So it was a lot of volume, very high paced. And I had two of my peer colleagues. One was headed towards retirement within a few weeks, and one was headed to retirement a few years. And both of them passed away unexpectedly. We got the phone call about my first colleague, and it was a punch to the gut. It was like she was so close to retirement and,
mm,
unexpectedly passed. And 3 weeks later, get another call, and my other colleague all of a sudden passed away, without
mm.
any warning. And here I was, I felt like I was last man standing. And
I'm
when you
so
kind
sorry
of
for
turn
your
around
loss.
and yeah, you looked left, you looked right, and you're like, oh my gosh, they're the hours and the pressure that I was working under as well. And the realization of, okay, something's got to give. Something, and that's, you never want to have that intense of a wake up call, but sometimes it just happens that way and you need to listen.
Right. And as a result of that wake up call, what changes did you make in your life?
So I thought I had almost 18 years in with this company at that time. I loved what we did as a company, absolutely loved it. Thought
Mhm.
I would retire from that company, but I knew that the environment I was in, the department I was in was just a pace and a stress that I couldn't get away from.
Mhm.
So I jumped departments, thinking that I was going to something that would give me more balance. But I realized in hindsight, I always equated to the movie The Runaway Bride with Julia Roberts when she says, I realized I wasn't running towards something, I was running away from something. And what I realized was I wasn't super excited about the next job I was taking within the company. I was more excited about getting away from the pace and the pressure that I had been in for so long. And it just wasn't the right situation. So I stuck it out for 2 years. And then just wasn't the right situation. So we ended up departing.
Mhm. And so when you ended up departing the company, that's a huge change because as you mentioned that, out of high school and right there, like, being in the workforce for so long. How did
Mhm.
that sit with you?
Oh, it was a gut punch. It was horrible because I
Mm,
wasn't expecting the departure. It happened. I think it needed to happen. I had been toying in my mind with, I probably should make a change, but I was scared to make a change. Not having that college degree and being, so far into my career, knowing that, okay, I'm out of work. If I go back to the same type of work, I would be positioning myself against, people much younger that have so much more college experience. They have college when I didn't. And it was really scary. It was very
Yeah.
scary.
Yeah, and here's the thing, a lot of people don't realize that experience is very important, because so many times, even if you have had a good college degree, and when you go and look at the jobs, there's sometimes any good jobs. I mean, a lot of kids get hired directly from the colleges itself. Like now they've got alumni programs and all that. But back
Mm-hmm.
then, so many jobs, you would take a look at it. They're requesting 3 years of experience, 5 years of experience. Like, how do you get that? And one of the things I'll share is that I used to work for biopharmas, quite some time back in my previous life. And we had so many smart
Mm-hmm.
leaders who had not gone to college, but who grew up in the company, and they knew it back and forth and had learned the
Right.
nuances. And so the way I look at it is that, like, you have gone through school of life.
Mm-hmm.
And
Absolutely.
what did you do with your fear?
I sat in it first. I think my initial reaction was to try and hide it and laugh through it and pretend
Mm,
like it didn't exist. But something I always tell myself is, a feeling fully felt, it fades. So I had to kind of let it out. You can let it out in many different ways. Some people, they go to a counselor or they talk to their spouse. I would go to my friend's house and brush horses for 2 hours and just kind of talk it through and hear myself talking. And that was it was very cathartic. And just talking about it over and over and playing the worst case scenario game with myself and letting myself go to that place of, okay, what's the absolute worst thing that could happen? And I would go to the place of, I can never find a job again and no one will want to hire me and I lose the house, I lose this, and I'm
mm,
homeless. So I would let myself go there and then I'd sit back and say, is that really going to happen? Yeah, probably not. But
mm,
allowing myself to kind of go there and feel that was like, okay, now I've dealt with that, I've talked it through. Let's set that aside and get honest with myself
mhm.
about what could be next.
And it was fantastic that you had that support. And it's important to have that support in your life, whether it's a friend or a counselor or whoever it is. Because when
Hmm.
you're going through these tough times, as you mentioned, it's important to embrace those feelings, embrace those fears, and they're not just going to walk away in a day.
They don't
It's,
disappear.
as you said, you gotta sit through it, you gotta face it, you gotta walk through the fire. So, as you were facing your fears,
Hmm.
how did you reinvent yourself and what direction did you take?
Yeah, so I started once I dealt with all that fear, I started thinking, okay, I've done a lot of good things over my career. And I started taking an inventory of what are the things that I was super, super good at,
Hmm.
and where were the projects that I would lose track of time. I'd look up, it'd be 8 o'clock at night and I'm still at work and someone picked up my kids for me. So I started getting serious on what were those things that I did really well that made me special, that people would come to me for help. So I kind of wrote that down as one column. And then I was like, okay, well, what are the things I love to do? And I started seeing these common themes through my life. And, I picked apart my different jobs about what did I love about that job? What I love about that job? And this theme of personal connection and learning from each other. Those were kind of the common themes. I'm super curious, always asking people about what their problems were or what did they think or how did they end up where they ended up. And kind of getting clear on those. And then I had to figure out, okay, what do I do with all of that? And I used some technology. I used AI to help me get clear on that and offer up some different career suggestions and ideas. And that's how I found my way into career transition coaching. So I actually am doing what someone helped me with when I got let go from my job. I'm now doing that for others. And it honors the themes that have been all through my life about learning from each other and then paying it forward.
Yeah, and that's very powerful. So, Jen, something you mentioned was taking inventory and seeing the patterns, because always what happens is, not always, it's most of the times that I've seen with my clients, especially if they're laid off or if they're looking to transition into another career, they feel that they don't have the experience. And it is about knowing and having that inventory of transferable skills. So if somebody's looking to transition, what are the first few steps you would recommend that they take?
Well, I think that that inventory is important, but it has to come once you've settled and let the dust settle. I think the
Mm-hmm.
folks that get laid off and then they immediately jump into what's my first action, they miss the magic. It's there's magic that happens when you unplug, even if it's for 2 weeks, to get
Mm-hmm.
let all that. There's so much that happens once you get laid off, and trying to do both at one time doesn't help you at all. So do all your process stuff, but then get clear with your and get. I like to kind of get away from my environment, kind of get away from the house, away from everything that's normal, get a new environment, and just sit down and walk. Do a lot of walking to talk to yourself about what went well, what didn't go well. And a lot of people say that, well, my job is toxic, my boss is toxic, it was horrible. But there's a lot of wisdom in how did I contribute to that environment. And I think that that was, in my case, I had to get very clear with those last 2 years when I changed departments. Was it great? No, absolutely not. But I realized that the piece that I contributed to that, and every situation that you're in, it was okay. Had I put up different boundaries around the work I did, I probably would have been in a different position. So taking
Mm-hmm.
stock of how you contributed to that situation as well. And then what do you want it to look like going forward? Um, because too many people jump into that job search trying to shoehorn themselves into the next opportunity versus getting clear with what they're good at and what they love and having the job fit into that. And it's kind of a reverse way of thinking about it, but I find the people I work with that take that approach end up a bit happier in the end.
It makes sense, because think about it. If you're jumping straight into it, your emotions, and that's where you were talking about having that resilient mindset, that
Hmm.
if you start out with the right mindset, then you're looking at things objectively. And one of the key things that pops out is directing it back towards yourself. Yes, situation outside is going to be horrific, like you said. Sometimes it can be a very toxic boss, but it's what could I, like you mentioned, what did I contribute, or what could I learn from that? So taking those lessons helps you
Hmm.
bring that perspective, like, okay, what is it that I want to do next? So that's bringing that self accountability is a very, very key piece, because then it allows you to even trust yourself. And you talk about trusting your gut. Tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, so where I ended up now, so I did pretty much a 180-degree change from what I had been doing to what I'm doing now. And there was some folks that were in a very kind and loving way asking if that was the right step, because it was so different. And every time I had to realize that when folks would question my next choice, my next career for one reason or another, I had to realize that most of them were coming from a place of concern and love, um, and that I had to thank them and push it to the side. Um, and I kept coming back to that list, the inventory list and the priorities. And I even went so far as to, there's an exercise about what are your big rocks? What are the most important thing to you? And I'm a rock collector. Wherever I go walking or the beach or vacation, I bring rocks back. And I put myself together a jar that has big rocks, little rocks, and I have written on them what's most important to me. And I would keep it on my desk and just refer back to it. When I was making decisions or considering different paths, I always would look back and say, does that align with what I've already declared as the most important things? And if it doesn't, that I gave myself permission to set it aside and refocus on what was important to me, not someone else.
Yeah, visual reminders definitely get you going. And it's sometimes what happens is we're working so much on automation,
Mhm.
and brain does work on automation because brain is designed to just suffice, not optimize. So when you're doing that, having that reminder can be so meaningful, because you mentioned that you're you that walk. So as you're walking and as you're picking up rocks, and now there is a reminder. So it's almost of a reinforcement of the decision or the conversation you had with yourself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and a reminder of like, okay, trust yourself. And yes, other people will come from a place of concern and love, and yet you're the one who's living your life. And you also mentioned that you took help of some AI. So let's talk
Mhm.
about that, because I can definitely say that there are a lot of assessments that can help you with career choices and all that. So, what kind of tools did you use, and if there are any that you would recommend?
Yeah, so primarily what I love to start out with, and what I did to myself, and I use this exercise with some other folks in transition that I work with, is I use that exercise that I did about priorities. I said, what am I super good at? That's not bucket number one. I put down 3 or 4 bullet points, super specific about what I really enjoy doing. In the second bucket, I put down what are the things that I'm super good. What do I really enjoy doing? But then the third bucket has to do with priorities and values. What's important to you from, like, for career transition? There are some folks that say, I want to stay in the pharma industry, or someone else may say, I must work remotely because of whatever. But whatever's for me, I had to work for an ethical company, something I felt good about giving back. So when I took all those buckets, and I would leverage AI, even like a chat GPT. And the trick there is, when you're working with it, you have to tell it who to be. You have to give it a persona first. If not, it's going to answer you as a generalist. So I always tell my folks to start off with, a good persona is, you're a career transition consultant, or you're a career coach. You've got 20 years experience. Give me 10 jobs or titles that leverage the following. And you can copy in your 3 buckets. And then I always also tell folks to type in, ask me any questions for clarity before you begin, because then you're asking the AI bot to refine your request before it answers. And if the more specific you are about your 3 buckets, the better response you're going to get. And it could be something that's totally out of left field that you never even thought about. And the beauty about using AI is it's very simple to grab, the second result from the list and say, dig in, tell me more about that career, and then dig into it. What companies hire that type of career? What skills are needed? So it's a great kind of it's a intentional bunny trail, if you will, where you start with one idea and you can just keep digging deeper and deeper. It's been super, super helpful for a lot of folks that I've worked with.
Oh, absolutely. And rather than considering AI as your enemy, you can use it as your executive assistant. I mean, it can be a team. Make it work for you. So, in your experience as a career transition coach, what are some of the themes that people, like, who have been successful in landing their jobs versus people who have struggled in landing their jobs?
Yeah. So the folks that I find that are successful quicker, I call them landings. When they land in their next opportunity but quicker, is one, they're open-minded. They're open to talking to people. And I think networking gets a really bad rap these days because folks are very narrow-minded on what that means. And it's just a connection. I call it connect working. You're connecting with people on, it can even be just a random conversation. But that's so important, is being open-minded on declaring what you want and why you want it, but being open to how that happens. And then it's through conversations a lot of times that opportunities will surface that you weren't expecting, and running down that road at least far enough to rule it in or rule it out. So many folks that I find don't land quickly, or they end up somewhere that they're not happy, is they have their specific endpoint in mind and they're not open to any other opportunities. So again, and they're not willing to talk to people and have those curious conversations. So it's super important these days. You're not asking for a job, you're just asking for connection and letting the jobs will come, but it's that connection that you need to have.
Absolutely. And that's such a powerful thing, because at the end of the day, it is still people hiring people. And in my experience, what I've seen is that when you have warm connections, you can reach out to them. They're happy to introduce you to other people. They're happy to recommend you, or even learning, like, what the company's like, or even learning as to what their experience is, if that's the job that you want to pursue. Networking can bring so many valuable assets and relationships. I mean, for me, relationships are priceless.
Yeah. And I like to tell when I'm talking to folks, especially introverts who are really afraid of making connections, I call it the safari strategy. You never want to go at them directly, right? Kind of come at people from the side. And that means don't always make it just about a job. And I have to network with 3 people. If there's someone in your sphere, find something that you can feed them, because it's all about give and take. So find a podcast, find a TED Talk, find an article that you can send over to them and say, hey, I just tripped across this TED Talk. You were the first person I thought of. Wonder how you're doing. Can we catch up sometime in the next 2 weeks? Because then you're making it about a thing. You're not making it about you, and you're not asking for something. You're giving, and then it'll come back around.
Absolutely. Some great pointers there. So Jen, share with us, where people can connect with you. What do you offer? If you have any books, everything about yourself.
Sure, absolutely. Well, my website is jen-fort.com. And I have started, since I did get let go from that position, I also started a book series. It's called the Wisdom and Warnings book series. And in the past 9 months, I've published 4 books right off the bat. And it is from a collection of over my life, those curious conversations, talking to people, gathering all this wisdom, and then I've kind of curated all that into different life milestone categories. So I've put together a book on from divorce mess to happiness, all the lessons learned about that season. And also I just put out a book, Tips from the Quad, all the wisdom about that you didn't, that you want to give your kids about going to college, but they're going to roll their eyes. So so I've started this Wisdom and Warning book series, and then some career coaching, and you can find all that at jen-fort.com.
And where can people find your books?
You can find them on Amazon, and you can just search Wisdom and Warnings, or off my website. They're all linked.
Okay, fantastic. Any last words? Any last thoughts you'd like to share with her audience?
The last thoughts is be kind to yourself. Give yourself some grace. Trust your gut. Declare your why. I think you were talking about your why in the very beginning of this episode, getting clear on your why, and then your next step, they're going to unfold as you walk. It's just be kind to yourself.
Yes, that's a beautiful way to circle it back. Be kind to yourself. And thank you, Jen, for being with us and sharing your wisdom so openly. And
thanks for having me. I greatly appreciated it.
Oh,
Great
absolutely.
day.
Keep making the difference that you're making, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to benefit from you.
Fantastic. You too.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, wonderful audience, for being with us, because without you, the show would not be possible. Do reach out to us. Let us know how we can serve you and support you in your life journey so that you can live the life you deserve. And thank you, Juan, for making the show technically possible.
Thank you for being part of Beyond Confidence with your host, Divya Parekh. We hope you have learned more about how to start living the life you want. Each week on Beyond Confidence, you hear stories of real people who have experienced growth by overcoming their fears and building meaningful relationships. During Beyond Confidence, Divya Parekh shares what happened to her when she stepped out of her comfort zone to work directly with people across the globe. She not only coaches people how to form heart connections, but also transform relationships to mutually beneficial partnerships as they strive to live the life they want. If you are ready to live the life you want and leverage your strengths, learn more at www.divyaparekh.com. And you can connect with Divya at contact@divyaparekh.com. We look forward to you joining us next week.